If you're watching this on the day I post it, happy Valentine's Day, although don't tell my partner, but I think I'm in love with this new card, although its name, Ready for a Fight, might be appropriate for what happens if she finds out. Before we talk about this card though, I need to talk to you guys about Energy Shield because I made another mistake. So in my kind of, live reaction video that I posted, I didn't read this card accurately, or I didn't realize the full, implications of the wording. So in this video, I'm going through all the new basic and protection cards that come with Silk that we have seen so far, except the team up card. I'll probably talk about that in a video with the appropriate hero. But nonetheless, let's get into this. Energy Shield is a zero cost upgrade that says attached to a character. For some reason, my brain had processed this as attached to a hero. You can attach this to an ally. This makes it infinitely better. That's not to say there aren't situations where you would attach it to a hero, but certainly being able to protect an ally has a lot more uses. The interrupt says, when attached character would take any amount of damage, spend X energy resources, prevent X of that damage. If an ally is taking consequential damage, I can just pay an energy, and now it isn't. It's one resource for one healing, after the initial cost of playing the card from your hand, so you do lose a card from your hand that could spend on something else. But that is really good on the right allies, that is really good. Now the obvious comparisons are to Med Team and First Aid. Med Team is 3 cost with say 4 effective resources. Med Team can heal 6 across 3 turns. Energy Shield, across 3 turns if you pay 1 energy each turn, would heal for free. Long story short, for the same cost as Med Team, Energy Shield would, prevent half the damage that Med Team could have healed. But Energy Shield is 0 cost initially. Med Team is a huge investment. It's most of your hand, unless you've got lots of resource generators set up or found some doubles, etc., etc. Med Team is a big commitment. If you have problems on the board, it's going to kill your tempo. You're going to have to suffer pressure. Maybe you played Med Team, but you couldn't defeat that minion, so on and so forth. So Energy Shield being 0 cost, just throw it out there really easy, continue on with my turn. That's actually a huge benefit. So normally I'd be, oh, Med Team's twice as efficient, but there's something to be said for the power of a 0 cost, low commitment card that you can just slap out there, and then you don't even have to use it the first turn. If the ally has at least 1 hit point left, you can use this to save them. You don't have to keep them topped up, so on and so forth. First Aid is kind of similar. So if I have First Aid in my hand of 5 cards, and I pay for it from hand, I'm down 2 cards at the end of that little sequence. Energy Shield, if I pay 2 energy resources, I also prevent 2 damage. So you could say they're comparable, but Energy Shield has to be played first, so it's kind of 1 extra cost to set it up, and then it's equivalent to First Aid from then on. Now, First Aid and Med Team heal, which is a difference, but in a lot of cases on allies, it will be very, very similar, maybe in like 90% plus of cases. First Aid also has a much better tempo than Med Team, but going back to just First Aid and Energy Shield, then it's kind of set and forget. I don't need to hope I draw into First Aid to keep healing my ally. I won't get, a bunch of First Aids on one turn and, not enough damage on my allies to heal, so on and so forth, then have a drought of, oh, I can't keep this good ally alive. So Energy Shield being that reliable is particularly good, I think. And actually, this is another point in favor of it, and actually First Aid over Med Team sometimes, is that Med Team can put out 6 healing. And if you have just one particular ally you want to keep alive, that's 6 extra uses, like 6 extra turns in a lot of cases for protection. That's often too much. You often won't need all that. So the efficiency starts to look a little closer when we take the actual time span of a game into account. If we're just looking to protect one ally, which is what Energy Shield, if you attach it to one specific character, is going to be for. The big downside I've kind of been circling around here is that Energy Shield requires an energy resource, not just a resource, not just a card or anything, an energy resource. That makes it a lot more limited for some characters, especially if certain, upgrades supports down on the board. They might be able to get whatever resource they need at any moment, but for other characters, this could be quite a problem. So definitely an interesting consideration. Some of the allies I think you'll get most use of this for are Rogue and Snowguard. I think those are the obvious two. They can get, like 3 to 4 thwarting or attack, depending on who Rogue is, using her ability on and so forth. More than this, we have signature allies. There's a few of my favorites on the screen now. Captain Marvel is Spider-Woman's signature ally, and with Spider-Woman's finesse resource generator, you can actually pay toward the energies you need for the Energy Shield, which is really, really good. But Energy Shield can be put on a hero, and to some degree that might be seen as more of a pure resource thing. It's like, oh, 1 resource for 1 less damage on my hero. Not a great ratio, but there are certain situations, particularly in protection, where that gains value, such as the cards that want you to not take any damage when you're defending. Unflappable is the obvious one, but all the event cards, hard to ignore, etc., etc. Staying healthy for Dauntless, which gives you retaliate, all that kind of thing. So that's kind of interesting as well. Now, paying the 1 energy to prevent 1 damage, if that's what you need to enable, let's say, Unflappable, It's not a huge gain, especially since you had to set up Energy Shield first. You had to kind of pay that initial cost. But if you have Unflappable and a few other things that are all now working because Energy Shield was able to protect you, then it starts to look a lot more valuable. So what heroes are actually going to like this? Well, we have to talk about this card having the tech trait, which immediately makes it really desirable for Iron Man. And I could actually probably have put Rocket on here. Let me slap him on the screen. Because he can go and use Tinkering in Alter Ego and turn a 0-cost card into 2 cards, which is pretty nice. Uh, Beyond those characters, and I should say because there's an energy resource on Energy Shield itself, Iron Man doesn't even mind having a couple copies, discarding them with his Repulsor Blast attack card. So that's all pretty fun. Storm, Gambit, and Nightcrawler on the right here, these mutant characters, have the highest concentration of energy cards within their hero kits. Out of their 15 cards, I think 7 or 8 of them are energies, which might mean they're more consistent than the average character with Energy Shield. For Storm, I really like to use the Thunderstorm weather to power up my allies. Energy Shield keeping them alive is going to be really handy, especially because she has some quite expensive cards in her kit. Allies, especially the good ones, can be quite expensive. So Med Team can be a bit of a drain for her to play sometimes, while Energy Shield will be really, really easy. Gambit as well, I really love this for because he doesn't just have, the potential to take Unflappable, etc., but he kind of has his own defense cards built in. He has Gambit's Guild Armor, which if you take no damage, you get to ready up after defending. So Energy Shield kind of guaranteeing that is an extra kind of, reward for using it to protect you if you need it. So I thought that was kind of interesting. 4 on the left here has, God of Thunder. He has 2 copies that generate energy resource each, which makes them pretty easy to use. Captain Marvel, she has a lot of resources. She has a triple energy resource. Black Panther I thought was interesting just to shout out Vibranium. Sometimes he needs a resource sink. Overall for me, I think Energy Shield is a really good card to have in protection. It is not something you'll be throwing in every deck, but in the certain kind of deck with certain, valuable allies or signature allies, or just a need to make sure my perfect defense things work without trying to overload the deck with too many defense events to the point that, you draw too many, just slapping down an Energy Shield going to be a really nice option. So not going in every deck, but it is going to be an interesting option for certain decks, which I think is a really healthy place to have cards. So I like Energy Shield. Guys, I gotta be honest, I made another mistake. When I saw the reveal article for Silk and I saw Scarlet Spider Protection Ally, I was like, oh, we can't play him with the basic Scarlet Spider Ally we already have because they have the same name. I was wrong. They have a different kind of subtitle, a different kind of alter ego name, which makes it okay. This was pointed out to me by St. Matthew, so thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I need to brush up on my spider lore. But yeah, that means Scarlet Spider can be used alongside Scarlet Spider. They make a pretty interesting combo. So what the new Protection Scarlet Spider does is that when another Web Warrior would take any amount of damage, Scarlet Spider can take that damage instead. His forwarding and attack stat are kind of terrible. They have double consequential for one of each. He's basically just there to soak damage. And you can actually have him soak 4 damage, and then with his last hit point, take a villain attack or something. So he's pretty useful in that regard. He's a very defensive Web Warrior ally, which makes a lot of sense for protection. As a protection ally, this design space is really, really good. So the old Scarlet Spider ally has an interrupt that when you're revealing the counter card, you try and guess what type, and if you're correct, you deal a damage to him. Oh no, but then you get to draw a card. Scarlet Spider can take the damage for Scarlet Spider. The new one can take the damage for the old one, and you still get the card draw. Hopefully that makes sense. Then Scarlet Spider is, it doesn't exhaust him. He could then try to make, a basic attack, and Scarlet Spider could defend him as well. Or you could just let that happen, because eventually you probably want your Web Warriors to leave play, so Web of Life and Destiny triggers some card draw. The ally I actually did name in my original reaction was the Peter Parker basic ally, who readies up a Web Warrior. He's the one Web Warrior who is so good you do not want him to leave play, so Scarlet Spider works pretty well to keep him around a lot more as well. I think the new Scarlet Spider has quite an interesting comparison to Med Team, which we already talked about. So Med Team heals 3 times, so you can heal 6. Scarlet Spider can prevent 4 damage and then block a villain attack. And what I also forgot when talking about Scarlet Spider was that there are other protection allies, Web Warrior allies, that are really good to keep around. Spider-Man Noir, who is a little bit slow to set up, and Scarlet Spider is, you could say, a little bit slow to pay off. So it's a couple of slow things together, which makes me a bit skeptical. But Spider-Man Noir can get up to like 3 forwarding or 3 attack if you have 3 treacheries put beneath him from his response. So keeping him around with Scarlet Spider can be pretty valuable that way. Then we've got Spider UK, a very, very fun card. It's an interrupt when someone attacks, he defends. You get to deal damage equal to the amount of Web Warrior cards you have. So having Scarlet Spider down is just going to help you boost it up. And if the enemy would not be quite defeated, Scarlet Spider can help make sure Spider UK survives the attack to keep using his really powerful interrupt in the future. Both of these are, slightly slow, a little bit of the whole protection downside going on here. But I think these combos are really fun, especially in longer games. If you can set this up early or something, I think you can have a lot of fun here. So actually, Scarlet Spider, the new one, has really gone up in my estimation. I actually quite like this card and its synergy with the other protection web warriors we have already. And of course, if you're running a web warrior hero in protection, he can help you trigger unflappable and things like that, because he can prevent the damage that a web warrior hero would take, or just, keep you alive. And then we get to Ready for a Fight. I am so excited for this card. People said they wouldn't make an aspect card that just lets you change form. They did. I'm very happy. This is a 1-cost upgrade. Preparation traded, by the way. Requirement physical, a little bit of a downside there, but it is interesting that they're playing with resources a lot more in the aspect cards this expansion. Wave of content, that's what it feels like. Interrupt. When an enemy would scheme, discard Ready for a Fight. Change to hero form, the enemy attacks you instead. So there's a couple things going on here. First of all, I want to point out how similar the physical requirement is to what doesn't kill me, and the effects are quite different, but I like that there is kind of a physical protection kind of build starting to form more coherently. But I do like that there is a physical resource protection build starting to kind of form here. If we ignore the fact that Ready for a Fight changes our form, we can kind of compare it to invisibility gear, which I talked about recently in my, Shuri's aspect card kind of deeper dive. And I was not a big fan of invisibility gear, because I typically regard the scheme as worse than an attack, and even just paying a 1-cost card to change it isn't that appealing. Ready for a Fight, making a scheme into an attack is way better, especially for solo play, where the main scheme can very easily go over. That is a very, very common loss condition in solo play. So Ready for a Fight, in one of the aspects which sometimes struggles with threat removal, is really good to stop the enemy scheming. Now the wedding is a little bit different. The wedding on invisibility gear is when an enemy would attack you, whereas the wedding on Ready for a Fight is when an enemy would scheme. It doesn't have to scheme against you. So in multiplayer, the timing here is quite flexible. You can do some interesting things. And the card ends up saying the enemy attacks you instead. So you can pull attacks that happen against other players to you, even if you studied in alter ego, because it does change your form. It's really, really interesting. And when we talked about invisibility gear before, I compared invisibility gear to armor up. Ready for a Fight is kind of a more expensive armor up, but otherwise very, very similar. The wording again is a little bit different, the timing is a bit different, and you can use Ready for a Fight if you're already in hero form, because changing to hero form is not a cost. That will just make the enemy stop scheming and attack you. Really good against advance, even if you're in hero form. Trying to figure out how much value Ready for a Fight is actually worth is kind of an interesting question, because paying 1 cost just to turn a scheme into an attack isn't the best thing in the world, but combined with changing to hero form, combined with playing attacks to you, there are different things to combo it with. One thing to combo it with is a preparation. It's going to be practice plan, which is going to let you get it back to your hand, then play it again next turn, which is going to kind of let you kind of control the enemy scheming to a greater level than normal. It's going to let you just be safe to keep flipping whenever. It's just got some interesting uses worth keeping in mind, particularly with the characters that like preparations. Also want to point out its use with the unflappable kind of style of builds, because if you have unflappable down, you want to be in hero form to defend against an attack to make sure you get your card draw each round. But with Ready for a Fight, you can get alter ego, heal up, do whatever you need, use your alter ego support, maybe get rid of an obligation, who knows. And then when the enemy starts to scheme, boom, use Ready for a Fight. Instead of scheming, they're attacking, you can now defend, and unflappable will trigger. So it's making it really consistent. Heroes that want to go alter ego but have good defense stats, maybe going to like this. Angel's Area is another card which came out and was, really interesting, but I don't use this card very often, partially because the kind of decks where I want to be defending a lot don't want to go alter ego. But as I say, Ready for a Fight can kind of smooth that whole process out, which I think is going to be really, really useful. But let's talk about the places this card is really going to shine, because changing a scheme to an attack, yeah, is helpful, but is it 1-cost upgrade taking one of my precious deck slot space is helpful? I'm not sure. Changing to hero form on the right hero, however, is amazing. So let's talk about the spider characters first. So we have Silk with Spider Reflexes. This is a card that gives her a benefit when she defends, but if you're an alter ego, which she wants to because she's got card draw there, she can't use it. So this will kind of allow her to use it, even if she's flipped down to alter ego to get card draw before. I think that's kind of interesting. Ghost Spider as well has a really good response on her hero card. So if you've gone alter ego, you are going to maybe lose out some value that way. Maybe not get to trigger your responses. Maybe not get to trigger your web bracelets. Not anymore with Get Ready for a Fight. Peter Parker I thought was actually interesting. Sometimes you go alter ego and there's backflip in my hand and I can't use it. But if you're ready for a fight, you could flip down. And we believe it works that Spider Sense will trigger. We'll get a card draw because an attack is initiated against him. And then you get to use a backflip, which is pretty awesome. Spider Ham, I think, is another good home for this. So the Web Warriors are really liking this. So Spider Ham, when he takes any amount of damage, you get a tune counter. So being attacked and taking damage is going to give him money, so he automatically prefers to be attacked than schemed against. But he also has his recovery stat of 5 and gets a 2 encounter when he recovers. So you're just going to be able to flip Ultra Ego, heal more, but also get back down to take more damage. I think that kind of loop is going to work out actually surprisingly well. Now, one of the most obvious places for this card, because it's so similar to Armor Up, which is a great card, is for Colossus. Colossus, when you flip to Ultra Ego, you get to shuffle a Colossus card into your discard pile. The quicker you get sent to hero form with this extra form change, from Get Ready for a Fight, the more you're going to be able to use Aspiring Artist to, that's his thing to shuffle a card back in. That's kind of good on its own. But when you flip down to hero, you get a tough. So the quicker you start to change forms, you basically accelerate the cycle. You get more toughs. If you can, end the turn in Ultra Ego, get that 6 hand size, flip down with Get Ready for a Fight, block the attack on the tough, whatever. You can then end the following turn, Ultra Ego, because you are now free to just flip down again. So you get that 6 hand size even more often, just like using Armor Up. So yeah, this is good for Colossus. Bishop is another character that I thought was interesting to talk about this for. And by the way, doesn't it look like Colossus is just painting Bishop here? Don't these art styles and the way they framed the characters look very similar in terms of proportions and stuff? Different artists, interestingly enough. So Bishop has this temporarily displaced ability, which is response after you change this form. Add a temporal card in your discard pile to your hand. A lot of the time, that might be his uniform. If you discard his uniform, yeah, you're going to flip down to try and get it. But then you get it, you play it. You can't use it immediately because you're Ultra Ego. You need to be attacked. Just having a copy of Get Ready for a Fight in your deck could allow you to flip down, do that more immediately. Sometimes you don't find the resources after taking an attack. The uniform doesn't pay off that much. Okay, you need to go Ultra Ego and heal, but now you've slowed down tempo again because you're not getting value out of the uniform for another turn. Getting him back to hero form, I think, is really valuable. Need to experiment to see quite how much this is going to be good, but definitely something I'm interested to try. She-Hulk is another character that I think is going to be really good with Get Ready for a Fight. She has the same 4 hand size in hero, 6 in Ultra Ego, so being able to just end more turns in Ultra Ego, which is kind of funny considering it sends you to hero form. That's going to let her get that bigger hand size more often, which is good. It's going to let her trigger her identity card abilities more often. So if you're able to flip more often, you'll get her hero form response to deal 2 damage more often. But you'll also get to end in Ultra Ego more often to trigger I Object to prevent a threat going on at the start of the villain phase. And it's also going to make split personality line up even better most of the time, in my opinion, which is pretty cool. Oh, and not to mention, she has a really good recovery, and She-Hulk, actually like Colossus, a lot of physical resources which make paying for that requirement on Get Ready for a Fight a lot easier. Vision, I think, is really interesting here. One of the popular ways to play Vision is to stack up a bunch of minions against you who are in intangible form, and they can't hurt you because you're taking 2 less damage from each attack. But sometimes you get something like his obligation, you need to go Ultra Ego, and then you got like a million minions in front of you, and you have a problem because now they're all going to scheme against you. In solo especially, you could just lose. Now, Vision can flip Ultra Ego, do whatever he needs to there, get rid of his obligation, etc., etc. Then, when the villain would scheme, with Get Ready for a Fight, now they attack. Boom, Vision is back down in hero form, Intangible kicks back in, and he takes 2 less damage from that attack the villain is now doing, but also all the minions against you are now going to go into intangible form and probably not hurt him, which I think is really, really fun. Next up is Black Widow. You know I had to talk about her here. I'm curious about the interaction with Simpsu. The way I believe the timing works is that you can trigger Get Ready for a Fight, flip down to hero form, you're getting attacked. I can exhaust to defend. Then after that's all finished resolving, Simpsu, I can trigger the response from that to ready Black Widow. The timing is kind of weird, so I'm like 60% sure this works, and if it works, it's incredible. I took out the Psychic Misdirection interaction with Psylocke for Change of Fortune from my video covering Nightcrawler's Aspect Curse, and it turns out apparently that works, so I just wanted to make sure I covered this here. But yeah, I'm potentially really, really excited for this. Something which definitely works is here with Magic. So what you can do with Magic is when you flip down to hero form, and Get Ready for a Fight is going to do this when you're getting attacked, you can use that interrupt to put a spell from your discard pile on top of your deck. Namely, this is going to be Magic Barrier if you have it available, and that means you can play it from the top of your deck for free to prevent free damage. So that's kind of decent, but it gets really good when you factor in Limbo if you don't have a better use for it. Because what you can do with Limbo is at the start of the villain phase, you can exhaust it, swap a card with a physical resource on top of your deck. Then when the villain attacks later on in the villain phase, you can trigger Get Ready for a Fight. Magic flips down, you trigger this interrupt you can see on her Ultra Ego here. Now when you play Magic Barrier for free, you're guaranteeing it's going to get the free damage as well as the free damage blocked because it requires the right resource type to be on top of your deck. And you stack that there first with Limbo, so it's kind of a 2-part combo, maybe a 3-part combo with Get Ready for a Fight. So that's fun in itself. But you can also do this kind of with Shield Spell, which is a protection card, 0 cost, and it's a spell. So you could do something like this with Limbo. You could swap Digging Deep or White Fox on top of your deck, then trigger Get Ready for a Fight. Ilyana swaps down to Magic. You put Shield Spell on top of your deck, you use that to defend the attack, and that discards the top 5 cards of your deck, which should get you Digging Deep back or White Fox into play. So that is a fun little combo. A little bit complicated maybe, but I actually think that's kind of good. Wolverine is a character I mentioned in my reaction initially about using this because a lot of people don't want to go Alter Ego with him because his response after the player phase begins heals 2 damage. If you start the phase Alter Ego, you miss the healing here. If Get Ready for a Fight, you don't. But it's getting 2 healing on Wolverine worth a 1 cost card that requires a physical. Maybe not in itself, but there's a lot of really good mutant stuff that only functions if you're Alter Ego. But more than that, Moira McTaggart will get you more card draw if you can keep flipping more often. So if you're playing Moira in a solo deck with Wolverine in protection, I actually think Get Ready for a Fight starts to gain some value if you go for that strategy, which is kind of interesting. Don't think I'm putting it in every build. Kind of in a similar way to Colossus, we have War Machine who gets a tough when he changes to hero form if he has upgraded chassis out. But if he does, then it starts to gain some value that way. If you can flip down more often, you're going to get more toughs more often, get more value out of this card. Not super sold on it, but War Machine is very, very bad in solo play at, covering the threat. So, especially in protection. So I think having Get Ready for a Fight to let him go Alter Ego, get some ammo, but then not lose the main scheme to being schemed against, is actually pretty good in itself. Gambit Skilled Armor, which I mentioned earlier in the video, 1 cost upgrade. After you defend and take no damage, ready Gambit. If you start the turn Alter Ego, there's a good chance that you just won't get to use this. His hero cards are kind of, part Alter Ego, part hero form. If you go down to use one part of it, you kind of miss out on the other part sometimes. So Get Ready for a Fight, letting you change form, kind of, an extra time, actually lets you make more full use of his kit, which I think is pretty cool. Ultimately, I think like Colossus and She-Hulk are like the shining stars of this, maybe a couple of the Spider characters. There might even be other characters I have missed out on seeing, but I just like this card. The ability to change form is very powerful, very useful. In fact, I feel like there is a combination I've forgotten. I've been talking about, wanting an aspect card to change form for a long time. I cannot remember what the crazy combo was that I was looking for with it, but nonetheless, this is a really, really good card. Stop Hitting Yourself is a 2-cost event that comes in Silk's pack. It is attack traded, serves a hero response. After you defend against an enemy attack and take no damage, deal damage to enemy equal to your defense for that attack. I love the name of this card. I love the art on this card. She's actually pulling Rhino's fist into his face with her webbing. Ghost Spider is. That's really funny. But do I like using this card? It's going to depend on the character. Most characters have 2 defense. Some have 3 defense or can get to 3 defense. A couple can go beyond that. It's a couple that can go beyond that I'm most interested in this card for, or also just protection in solo play, because to be honest, I think the most valuable place a lot of the time for this damage to go is going to be on the villain. For the most part, I think you'll be playing this on characters that have 3 starting defense, and then you can use Armored Vest. Everyone's going to run that if they're running this card, I'm pretty sure. That's 4 defense. Potentially Defense Specialist from Specialized Training could put you up to 5, but I think 4 is more realistic as a baseline. If I play a 2-cost card and deal 4 damage, it's not the end of the world for an aspect card. Actually, that's, kind of decent in some ways. But you have to defend, you have to take no damage from that attack, and your damage is then restricted to going back onto the same enemy. There's a lot of conditions there, a lot of things to meet. It's also a 2-cost event in itself. So if that's going against the villain, who is normally the enemy attacking you, and you then get an encounter card you need to deal with, you don't have many cards left in hand potentially, or, a lot less. So if something bad comes up, you could be in trouble. But let's just explore using this on minions for a minute. We have Change of Fortune from Nightcrawler's pack, and if you defend against a minion here, you'll then get to deal, let's say, 4+ damage. It's probably going to defeat most minions. You're going to trigger Change of Fortune. Kind of like that. My big question mark is, why would I not just use Riposte here? Hopefully I'm saying that right. 1-cost event. When your hero defends against an attack, it gets +2 defense for that attack. If you don't take damage, deal 3 to the attacking enemy. So it's 1 cheaper, gives me +2 defense to make its condition of not taking damage easier, and then I get to deal 3 damage, where Stop Hitting Yourself might a lot of the time be dealing 4 damage. So initially I'm a bit skeptical on Stop Hitting Yourself with Change of Fortune, because I don't even use Riposte in that many Change of Fortune decks. But what I thought was interesting is using these 2 cards together, because if you get the +2 defense from Riposte and then play Stop Hitting Yourself, that +2 defense also counts toward the damage from Stop Hitting Yourself. So if you have 4 defense and I play Riposte, ultimately, I'm probably going to end up dealing 9 damage. So this is giving protection tons and tons of damage against the villain. I wonder if there's like a defensive protection rush kind of deck where I'm defending but I'm destroying the villain. Very interesting for solo, good for solo to close out games. But deck spots are kind of precious. I don't know if these cards will earn their spot a lot of the time still, but I'm really curious to try that. That combo of these two cards together sounds really, really fun. Now, if we're talking about using defense cards to boost up the stop hitting yourself attack, we can look at some other tools. We have Desperate Defense, going to add us +2 defense as well, but even Zero Cost Expert Defense, which gives us +3 defense, that we're kind of converting into free damage here. Zero cost for free damage sounds good, but it's kind of shoring up the damage from stop hitting yourself being a little bit low for how conditional it is, in my opinion. So it's not, a flat gain of zero cost for free damage, but it is pretty handy and interesting nonetheless. I'm really curious to see about boosting up my defense as high as I can to just do one massive stop hitting yourself to the villain. Much like Energy Shield and Ready for a Fight, I think this card's usage is really going to come down to what hero you're playing a lot more than what archetype you're playing necessarily. For me, I'm looking at characters like Nightcrawler, who with his Cutlasses, which is already a really good card you really want to play a lot of the time, uh, he can get 4 defense, 5 with Armored Vest, 6 with Specialized Training, so he starts to just have that little head start, that little extra value, and he's already particularly good at defending enemies, even minions, so I think that's going to work really well. Spider-Woman, I just sort of threw on here for the honorary mention. I know it'd be in the comments if I didn't. She can potentially get 4 or 5 defense, naturally before Armored Vest, which is kind of interesting. But I don't see this happening too often with her, particularly because of the multi-aspect thing. If you want damage, you could probably find a somewhat more reliable method. Silk, who this card comes with, obviously, is actually going to be very, very good with this because her Spider Reflexes can potentially give her 7 defense before Armored Vest, 8 with it, obviously. That might not be common, but I think it's definitely achievable. And combine that with, someone like Riposte, and you're going to be getting, potentially like 10 damage out of stop hitting yourself, which is really, really good for ending solo games. Gambit, however, I think is the star of the show. It is not unusual to sometimes build up to, 5, 6, even 10 counters, depending on what type of Gambit deck you're playing, especially if you're playing a very control-oriented deck. Natural Agility gives you +1 defense for each charge counter, so if you've amassed 10 counters and use Natural Agility, his defense goes from 3 to 13, 14 with Armored Vest. Then you can use Stop Hitting Yourself, spend 3 of his charge counters on the attack to power it up afterwards. You end up dealing 17 damage. You do need to have Natural Agility and Stop Hitting Yourself in the same hand together, but in solo play, that's deleting an entire villain stage on your own. In multiplayer, that is a huge progress. Okay, guys, just a couple of cards left. This is Dr. Sinclair. She's a therapist, 2-cost support. Alter Ego action to exhaust her, spend a mental resource. Heal damage from your Alter Ego equal to your reg. You may discard 1 status card from your identity. Any player may trigger this ability. First things first, I'm so excited to see more cards which see any player may trigger this ability. It's still, functional in solo play, but in multiplayer, it just gets so much better. I think cards like this really encourage teamwork and make the game feel, more of an interactive multiplayer experience, which is fun. Now, spending a resource to heal equal to your rec is really good. Being able to remove 1 status card is really good. But having to pay the 2 cost before all that, in the short term, this is quite expensive for what it does, I think. But in the long term, particularly in multiplayer, where someone's probably triggering it once every turn, it starts to look quite good, especially if the characters have a high recovery stat. The obvious comparison for this to me is the Night Nurse, which is another persona which removes status cards as well, but the removal of status cards with Night Nurse is forced. Why does that matter? Well, if you have a tough card, it will get rid of the tough card. Whoops. But Night Nurse is an incredible card. One of the most powerful cards, I think, in protection. It's subtle, but very cost-effective. Now, the big thing with Dr. Sinclair is you have to pay that mental each time you use her, and you have to be Alter Ego, so on and so forth. So I would still say the Night Nurse is, more powerful, but Night Nurse is arguably too powerful. So I think Dr. Sinclair is maybe a lot more balanced, put it that way. I also wanted to point out Second Wind here, a bit like for Get Ready for a Fight. I pointed out What Doesn't Kill You. Both those 2 cards use physical resources. With Dr. Sinclair and Second Wind, want a mental resource. And this is, to me, giving protection a real kind of home for mental resource decks, because they've always traditionally had energy. Now there's a couple of physical cards, now there's a couple of mental cards. And even quite fittingly, Night Nurse here has a mental resource on it. So all these kind of like little healing cards are mental resource cards. So I kind of like the synergy going on with that, even if Second Wind is terrible. And let's just play Dr. Sinclair in our multiplayer games instead. Where Dr. Sinclair starts to get really crazy is when we factor in downtime. Your Alter Ego gets +2 reg. If I have 4, 5, or 6 reg naturally, and I play downtime, now I'm at 6, 7, 8 recovery, and Dr. Sinclair's mental resource, hitting me for my rec, starts to look very, very good. especially if I'm a character that's prone to taking a lot of damage. Maybe I'm running Taunt, maybe I'm, I don't know, Deadpool, more on that soon. I just think this card is really good. This card, Dr. Sinclair, is basically like Recuperation, which we can see on the right here. Now, Recuperation isn't the most popular card anyway, but if you're in a multiplayer game, and someone's in protection, Dr. Sinclair has absolutely killed Recuperation, which isn't a bad thing because it gathers dusts for me a lot of the time. Dr. Sinclair is actually very usable. So Deadpool has the biggest recovery stat in the game of 8. That could be 10 with downtime if you so wanted. With his Chimichanga truck, he can recover twice, but if you're running Symbiote Suit, which of course you are, you're playing Deadpool, you can actually stack up his hit points to absurd levels to get absurd combos, and Dr. Sinclair can just heal him a lot and get your crazy combos going more. I think this might be too much for solo play if you decided to run Deadpool in protection, but in multiplayer, where the villain has a lot of health, where one giant Deadpool combo doesn't end the game, this could be useful. Just, give him more health, make even more damage on the next turn. So that's kind of fun. Hulk's Banner's Laboratory is actually really good for this. It gives him +2 rec, and it lets him spend a mental resource when Alter Ego, which is exactly what Dr. Sinclair wants in Alter Ego form. But there's a bunch more characters that have really good recovery, really good Alter Egos. Wolverine maybe doesn't have the best Alter Ego, but 6 recovery, 6 recovery. And, She-Hulk already has a card in Alter Ego that she wants to spend a mental resource on, Superhuman Law Division. So it's kind of an interesting, more mental Alter Ego-y kind of thing for She-Hulk. I think that's kind of curious. So definitely really excited to try She-Hulk with a few of these cards. The final card to talk about in this video is Madam Web, and this card is better than the movie. This is a 3-cost ally with 2 forwarding, 1 attack, 2 hit points. That's unimpressive. Web Warrior trait, very impressive. The response is after she enters play, look at the top X cards of the encounter deck, where X is the number of Web Warrior cards you control. You may discard 1 card looked at this way and put the rest back in any order. This is kind of a combination of Blindfold and Global Logistics. Blindfold looks at the top 5 cards and you can discard 1. Madam Web, it'll depend on how many Web Warriors you have out to, dictate the amount of cards you can actually look through. But she may discard 1, whereas Blindfold has to discard 1. Blindfold also has to put them back in the same order as she found them, aside from, the discarding of 1, whereas Madam Web may discard 1 and then can put them back in any order. Putting something back in any order is more reminiscent of Global Logistics or even Cable's Precognition event. But you get to look at the cards of the encounter deck and you can put them in any order you like. Global Logistics obviously has more flexibility as well. These cards are not the same, but they are definitely in the same design space of encounter card, deck manipulation. So I think that's really fun. I think she's really good in that regard, because I think, especially on the high difficulties, especially in solo even, manipulating the encounter deck is so good and kind of fun in my opinion. And, having that Web Warrior trait, having that low hit points, just means you're going to get card draw from her as well pretty soon, which is fun. 2 forwarding, always very useful, especially on a basic ally. What I realized with Madam Web is she has some really cool combos with the other basic Spider allies. We already talked about the original Scarlet Spider earlier in this video, but his interrupt has you look at the encounter card you're about to reveal. With Madam Web, you might have been able to look and set up what that encounter card is going to be, so you have perfect information for Scarlet Spider to guess, and thus get the card draw from him. Spider-Ham is a Spider ally that is not played very often, and that is because he can just get destroyed from 1 attack or 2 attacks. He's just a lot less efficient than most other Web Warriors. I do think he's maybe slightly underrated, but if you get bad luck with him, it does feel really, really bad. If Madam Web comes in and sets up, the encounter deck, you're going to know what he's going to discard ahead of time and be able to account for that and make sure you're getting extra uses out of him, which is really, really fun. I also just think she's useful for the Spider heroes. Ghost Spider, you kind of want to trigger your web bracelets, your responses, and you want to do it as efficiently as you can, ideally. And if you know what's coming up in the encounter deck, you can choose how you're going to trigger it. If I have Pura and Punch in hand, that will trigger my Ghost Spider responses, ready me up, and so on after I've defended the attack in the villain phase. What if the encounter card I'm revealing does not have a when revealed effect, which is what this card wants to, affect and cancel? Then Pura and Punch doesn't work. With Madam Web, I know it's going to be the right kind of card to trigger Pura and Punch. Spider-Ham as well. You can manipulate the boost icons on your boost card that's coming up in the future to make sure Spider-Ham takes the minimum amount of damage while still getting a tune counter. But also, you can maybe line up the Treachery card for one that deals damage to a character to get 2 encounters that way. He'd rather have an encounter card deal, 1 damage to all characters and get a 2 encounter for his troubles than deal with a giant tough minion. Ultimately, I think these are my 3 favorite cards from Silk's pack. I'm especially looking forward to Ready for a Fight. Just having an aspect card letting you change form, so exciting to me as a deck builder, just really fun, and I'm curious to see what we can make happen with this card. Just letting protection go Alter Ego safely is huge before we consider all these really fun specific hero combos. Yeah, really excited for Silk's pack. Hopefully you guys are too. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed it, leave a comment, tell me what your favorite card was, and I'll see you in the next video.